Hey everyone, Paul from Adopt and Embrace. Welcome to the Adopt and Embrace YouTube channel. We're continuing our live read of Adopt and Embrace Microsoft Teams, a manager's guide to communication, collaboration, and coordination with Microsoft Teams. So thank you for joining us for the live stream or catching us on the replay later on down the track. Today's going to be a reasonably short one. I'm just going to do one chapter today in part 2, where we focus around the 10 Ps, and the P we're going to focus on today is performance, which is really talking about, what does success look like? How do we measure success? How do we make sure we're going in the right direction with what we're doing within our team that we've designed within Microsoft Teams? There's a few things before we get into that chapter. Obviously, if you love the content and you want to hear more about the live read and some of the new content we've got coming up shortly, which we'll talk about in a second, make sure you subscribe to the channel. And it's really important because after Easter, after we get through this next little bit, and once we're through the book read, we've got some new content coming that I'm sure you'll get lots of value out of. It's called Adopt and Embrace Ask Us Anything. It's basically an opportunity for you to ask us, the Adopt and Embrace team, any question you like around Office 365 adoption, Microsoft Teams. It could be how to do something in an Excel spreadsheet. As long as it relates to Office 365, you've got a great opportunity to ask us a video question, and then myself or one of the team will answer that question for you within about 24 hours. And then all those questions and answers we'll be publishing on the YouTube channel and on LinkedIn and other places. So you get to see, get to learn from everyone else as we're answering questions that come from the community as well. So we're really excited about that program. We've been doing a bit of testing with a few people already. Got some really great questions coming in. So if you want to see that content, learn from the answers that we'll be giving to people that have probably similar questions that you do, in terms of how you get the most out of Office 365, make sure you hit that subscribe button now, and you'll be able to learn from that content as well. So with that, what we'll do, we'll just go into the chapter now, which is the performance chapter. It should take us probably 10 or 15 minutes, I suspect, to get through that content. And then if you've got any questions, feel free to put them in the chat, or you can save them up for Adopt and Embrace Ask Us Anything in a few weeks' time. So let's get into it. Performance. When it comes to discussions about teams, the word performance often comes up. In this chapter, we will explore what performance means when it comes to working together and collaborating on a project. Specifically, we will look at ways to measure it so you can keep on the right track to achieve your business outcomes. After all, that's what it's all about. In this hectic world of work, improving performance is an important and critical issue for many organizations. Many workers are not strangers to the do more with less mantra that their employers repeatedly recount at team meetings and briefings. They may have been at the receiving end of activities that build more efficiency into their departments, such as streamlining of processes, cost-cutting exercises, or restructure and redundancy programs to increase productivity and build scale across operations. But at what cost? And just an aside to that, I think in our post-COVID, and a lot of organizations that are really constrained for time, for resources, and people, because organizations have made cuts, have made redundancies, have stood people down along the way. So I think this idea of being focused on the business outcomes and how we try and achieve those is really critical to make sure we make the most of what we have at our fingertips. Businesses today are facing completely new challenges where strategies like those mentioned above may not ultimately result in the efficiencies they believe that would happen. Simply put, change is too fast, too ambiguous, and too complex. It's also unpredictable. With unpredictable change, you cannot plan or prepare for what comes next because you don't know what comes next. And the fact that we wrote this chapter before the pandemic, I don't think we knew what was coming next back then. Businesses need to reframe how managers and leaders view work and what and how teams and individuals perform their work and interact with each other to be able to manage and navigate the volatility. In this chapter, we will explore what performance means and how to measure it and set up your team in Microsoft Teams for success. So what is performance? In Training Ain't Performance, performance is defined as a function of both behavior and accomplishment of a person or group of people. Performance includes the actions of a person and the result of the action or actions. What this means is that performance is both a behavior to be displayed, but also an accomplishment or outcome to be achieved. It's not about the technology you are using, nor about any solutions you are proposing. It's also not defined as the number of people using Microsoft Teams, the number of likes on comments on your post, or even how many followers you have on your enterprise social networks. Performance goes far deeper than that. It's about applying practices that help us to achieve an outcome through people. This is one of my favorite talking points we talk with generally technology-based or people with a deep technology experience, not necessarily a deeper experience within the business of an organization. We talk about, what does success look like for Microsoft Teams? And quite often it'll be, particularly Microsoft people as well, to be honest, very, very much focused on active usage. So the number of people we have using that technology. And what we're trying to articulate in this chapter and just generally is that having a lot of people using a technology isn't performance. It's not really a true success measure. We like to call it a vanity metric. It does something. It gives us an idea of how many people have access to the technology and have logged into the technology, but it doesn't tell us something that the CEO of your organization would actually care about. Are we improving a business process? Are we getting a better business outcome? That kind of thing. So really the whole idea of this chapter is to try and get us to move away from that view of, the number of members in a team or the number of people logged into Office 365, the number of people logged into Microsoft Teams. They're not really great measures or great metrics to be able to help you tell us about the performance that your workforce is having with the technology. So what is your team's role in performance? Your goal in your team is to help your fellow team members achieve the desired results and outcomes that help support the strategy of the business, and to do so together, especially when there are factors such as dwindling resources, external market pressures, or financial constraints that constantly impact your team or global pandemic. Internally, the team may be under pressure due to a lack of information and resources for their team project, have various demands on their job, such as time, attention, and focus, or be working in an environment where the organizational culture or climate is not conducive to being supportive. As a result, the performance of the team will be impacted if you're not aware of all the internal and external forces at play. When it comes to determine how your team will perform, you'll need to revisit the problem you're trying to solve, which was covered earlier in this book. So where are you today and where do you want to be tomorrow? Firstly, you need to revisit the problem you're trying to solve, which we covered in the problem chapter, and it's in the first part of the 10 Ps workbook. If you haven't downloaded that, go to teamsbook.info, hit the resources button, and you can find the 10 Ps workbook about halfway down the page. As an example, it can be anything from, how does your organization find information quickly? How do you share knowledge or best practices across your networks? How do you solve a business problem? How do you manage expectations? Or how do you work across departments? Secondly, you need to analyze your current team's performance in relation to that problem, meaning you need to look at where you are today as a team and how ready you are to solve that problem. You may ask yourself the following questions as a starting point. What is happening today that we don't want to happen? Why is it a problem for us? What are we doing today that we could be doing better or more effectively? What is the actual performance at issue? Thirdly, you are now need to envision a future state or the desired performance. Questions you may ask as a team are, what would we like to happen? What should we be doing? What is the desired performance? Between your current and future state, you're now able to identify the gaps and define these as performance outcomes. To make things easier for you, start with how much this problem and your current performance is costing you every year. If you put some tangible measure such as a dollar value on it, then you're more likely to sit up and take notice. Hey, because we email all 10 team members the updated reports, if they respond by email and CC others, my inbox explodes. I spend a few hours every morning just going through it. What's it costing the business for me to be doing this? What do team performance outcomes look like? Your team will need to define achievable performance outcomes that are specific, tangible, and most of all, measurable against the overall business strategy. Performance outcomes can be around different areas, but as a starting point, you can consider the following as a suggestion. You may have others that are more relevant for your team, business, or organization. So the four we have here are customer. What are some performance outcomes related to improving our customer experience or the way we work with them? Financial. What are some financial targets or goals that we can put in place to show improvement over time? Business process. What can we streamline, automate, or impact to improve the processes of delivery to our customers? Innovation and insights. How will we measure new insights and innovation that continue to create value for customers and stakeholders? Together with your team, you can now delve into the details and create specific performance outcomes for your team. You may also call these KPIs, or key performance indicators. Some examples are shave 10% off our operating costs within the next financial year, decrease the amount of workplace accidents by 20% in the next 12 months, reduce the amount of emails by 45% in the next 6 months, decrease the time it takes to fill in forms by 50% by identifying new automated workflows that will save our company $50,000 by the end of 2020. Once your team decides on the performance outcomes, you'll need to consider how you're going to track and measure the results. For example, you may decide to use some of the analytics within Power BI. Ultimately, you will need to consider ways to track against performance outcomes so you can see trends over time. There's a couple of different lenses we can look at through here. We didn't actually cover in the book as well, but as I was reading it, then it kind of made me think about some recent thinking we've had at Adopt and Embrace about this kind of area. So the first thing is we can absolutely look at the business outcomes there. So saving time, saving money from an organization-wide point of view or a department-wide point of view. But I think there's something we missed in this chapter, which is an individual view of performance as well, and how we could potentially identify behaviors that actually have a huge impact not on only our performance, but the performance of others around us. We've been doing quite a lot of work recently around digital leadership and how do we equip leaders in organizations with the right behaviors and the right application of technologies to lead by example across an organization and really hit home some of the key fundamental actions or behaviors that we want to see across an organization to improve communication, collaboration, coordination, and that kind of thing. And the first of that process we're kind of working through at the moment is not to think about which tool to use or what technology applies in what situation. It's really to have a reflective view on yourself and think about, well, what are the different kinds of work that I do? I create stuff, I communicate with people, I collaborate on projects, I coordinate processes, I engage in a broader community across my organization. What are the behaviors that I see there, or the performance gaps that I see there at the moment that are stopping me from achieving what I want to achieve in that particular area? So as an example, if I'm creating content, so one of the things that might be stopping me from performing well in terms of creating content is I don't have enough focus time to get in that state of flow to actually get everything that's in my head down into a digital form. So the problem there, or the performance issue there, is maybe it actually comes down to calendar management or trying to create or carve out some space in my day to be able to effectively do my work. Once we have that kind of overcome, or we've kind of figured out how to solve that performance challenge, then we can look at how we apply tools like Word and OneDrive as an example to work on the early draft of that. So this idea of performance and how it applies to individuals as well as your team and organization, I think is really important. And I think it's a bit that we missed in the book, but something we're definitely thinking more and more about now is how do we think about performance at that individual level as well. Okay, so let's go to the next bit of the chapter. So measuring performance outcomes. One of the leading pieces of research when it comes to measuring and assessing value creation in communities is the conceptual framework of value. In this model, Wegner, Trainer, and Delat in 2011 suggest the following 5 ways to measure value. How is immediate value realized in the team itself? This is seen by measuring the level of engagement, the number of interactions, and the levels of participation. To some, this may be known as vanity metrics. This is not an ideal way of measuring value, but it does provide some instant numbers for how people are interacting within Microsoft Teams. We wouldn't recommend using these vanity metrics as a way of measuring the success of your team's implementation because they offer no actual evidence of a business improvement. They're nice to know and make you feel good about the numbers of likes, but overall, they're meaningless. More meaningful insights can be captured using third-party tools like Swoop for Teams from Swoop Analytics, or tyGraph Teams Analytics from tyGraph. Tools such as these provide insights beyond just how many people are using your team, and more importantly, how people interact within and across teams to create connections, breaking down silos within your organization. And the 2 tools we mentioned there, Swoop and tyGraph, they're both great for having a really business-focused conversation or a coaching conversation with leaders in your organization as well, in terms of how they engage with people across teams. And they have tools for Yammer and other platforms that we have, Facebook Workplace and things like that as well. So if you are trying to get that deep level of insight into how, beyond just who's using the technology, how active they are in the technology, and if they're liking stuff, and really thinking about how people are connected with the organization, how teams are connected to other teams in your organization, what topics of conversation they're talking about, how people are, what kind of personas people have in terms of the way they interact in these environments. Swoop and tyGraph are some really great places to start in terms of in terms of file information, and happy to recommend them. We don't get paid for recommending Sweep and Tygraph. They're just really great tools. I'd recommend you test them out and have a look at them. So how is the team's potential value realized? In this, you can measure potential value through outcomes such as an increase in team members' new skills or capabilities, or in the understanding and education of new tools used by the team that generated new learning of their applications. How is it applied value of the team realized? Applied value refers to the adaptation and application of the team to a specific situation. For example, based on the conversations and the teamwork experience in Microsoft Teams, what was created, used, or changed as a result? It could be identifying a new association or partnership between business units, or creating a new product or service for your customers. Applied value relates to leveraging the knowledge that was shared in the team through application to some business issue, project, or need. Alternatively, it could mean the establishment of a new practice. By demonstrating your team's applied value, you're able to promote and showcase a success story with your managers and leaders about how teamwork within Microsoft Teams generated business outcomes. These are the stories that people will want to hear. It makes use of Microsoft Teams relevant and meaningful for them because they can see now see the applications. And this little bit here we just talked about here, how to capture stories of success, or what we call exemplar stories. This is so powerful. It's that real social proof that you can use to help people in your organization understand how Teams or the rest of Microsoft 365 actually applies to a real-world business situation, a real-world problem, and they can see people in your organization having real success or achieving real success by solving that problem using this technology and their own how they apply it as well. At the core of a lot of the work that we do at Adopt and Embrace is this idea of a success story, and every project that we're going into, the end game for our team is, what is that story of success? What is that exemplar story that we can capture, that we could share as a repeatable pattern across this organization to help others in the organization, lift and raise a tide for everyone across the team. So if there's one thing you take away from this chapter, is just have that constant mindset of how do we capture that success story? How do we frame what has happened here in terms that the business would care about, that the business would be familiar with, the things they would understand, not just talking about the technology and how we're using the technology. So how is the value of the team realized? So you've changed your team's practice by moving from email to Microsoft Teams. You've shown some applications of how they can create or refine new ways of working. How is the new knowledge impacting business strategy and outcomes? And then the last one of the 5 is, how is value reframed? In the last phase, value is reframed and redefined. It is a reconsideration of value and the proposing of new models and frameworks that may require renegotiations with the powers that be, who have the legitimacy to define success at these levels. What this means is that your team has redefined the way work and teamwork are conducted in your organization, and may have come across processes or ways of work that are now considered redundant or too traditional to work in a modern workplace. Reframing value may result in a new vision, sets of expectations, and frameworks emerging that need new discussions and strategies. This is really important. This whole idea of reframing expectations or revisiting expectations as you make changes in your performance and the way you do things. Some of you may know that I did some research with the Queensland University of Technology, which is kind of its inspiration for starting Adopt and Embrace a long time ago. One of the key aspects of that research into technology-enabled mobile work and porosity of work-life borders really came down to this one thing around expectations, and making sure we have really clear shared expectations of each other, from manager and employee, or just to managers, or supervisor to direct report kind of thing. And a lot of people's actions and behaviors, and ultimately their performance, comes down to what their perceived expectations are that have been placed on them by their manager, as an example, or by their teammates. So a lot of the things that people are doing is based on this perception of what they think others expect of them. But the reality is that expectation isn't there. And as we improve the way we work, as we change the way we work with this technology, if we're not having a consistent conversation, iterative conversation with our teams, with our managers, with each other around what those expectations actually are, not just the perceived expectations, but the expectations actually are. I only want you to work 7 hours a day. It doesn't matter when you work those hours. Like, that's an expectation. But if you haven't communicated that as a manager, others in your team might think that if you send an email at 10 o'clock at night, there's an expectation you need to reply straight away to it. and that expectation might not actually be there. So having this consistent conversation around expectations within your team, with each other, can help overcome a lot of the challenges that we see in terms of performance. And this last bit of the chapter here is really talking about we need to keep reframing what performance looks like based on this shared understanding of expectations along the way. So in summary, performance relates to the specific goals your team will accomplish. They are written in such a way that they can be measured and evaluated against bigger goals, such as organizational or business strategy. Devising goals aligned to strategy enables your team to best promote and link their team actions to how they have directly created value for the organization and its clients or community. So key takeaways from this chapter: undertake an analysis of where you are today versus where you want to be tomorrow. Identify the performance gaps that need to be closed, and decide on the performance outcomes you would like to achieve in a specific manner and how to measure them. And then our end of chapter checklist is document what success looks like and how you will measure that success in your 10 Ps workbook. And as I said earlier, if you've got your 10 Ps workbook, head on over to teamsbook.info, click on the resources button at the top of the page, and you'll find a download to the PDF of the 10 Ps workbook about halfway down that page. And again, that's licensed through Creative Commons, so you can use that in your organization, roll it out to others in your business. If you think the 10 Ps workbook is a worthwhile way of helping people structure how they set up their teams in Microsoft Teams as well. So as at the start of the stream, I said this would be a reasonably short one today. Here in Brisbane, we're coming out of a snap 3-day lockdown, and there's a lot of stuff going on here. And I know that as soon as that lockdown finishes in a little while, there'll be so much noise behind me and people going out and about that it just won't be worthwhile doing a live stream with all that noise behind me. So we'll wrap it up there for today. Just looking forward to the next live stream, which we'll probably do next week, all things going well. Either next week or the week after. We'll go into the last 2 chapters of part 2 of the book, the last 2 Ps. So the next one is provisioning, and this is talking about how do we help our people get their team set up in the most efficient or effective way possible. So when it comes to provisioning, we've got basically 4 different ways or different approaches we can take to getting a team set up. So we'll go through each of those 4. The first one is basically do it yourself. The last one is completely automated, and there's 2 kind of options in between. So we'll talk a lot about provisioning and how to get your team in place. So if you're a manager that wants to create multiple teams, if you're an IT that wants to provision thousands of teams, a good chap kind of have a chat about on the next one. And then last but not least, is probably the most important chapter that we have in the book. It's called perishability. And if you remember back to the very first live stream, I think we introduced the concept of the 10 Ps. This was the P that was the one that we were stretching for because we needed to make it 10 Ps, make it a nice round number. But perishability, as it turns out, is probably the most important one that we have here. And basically, how do we make sure that we capture all the really important knowledge and information from the team, make sure that we put that into our knowledge networks, or capture it in some way that can be reused before a team gets archived, gets deleted, ultimately has an end of life, end of useful life in our organization as well. So they're the 2 chapters we'll focus on in the next live read. That'll take us probably about an hour to get through those 2 next time. But that's it for today. So thank you for joining me. I saw a few people joined us live, so thank you for doing that. If you've got any questions, feel free to pop them into the questions below the video. And if you're watching the replay, I'll get back and answer those comments as we can. But if you haven't done so already, make sure you subscribe to the channel, because we've got a lot of great Ask Us Anything content coming up over the next month or 2 that I know you're going to get value out of. So if you get value out of the book, then you're absolutely going to get value out of some of the content we've got coming along. So thank you very much for tuning in, and hope you have a great a long weekend if you're here in Australia, having a 4-day weekend coming up. Or if you're anywhere else in the round the world, stay safe, and we'll see you next time. Have a good day. Bye.